The Gaelic sport of hurling has existed in Ireland for centuries, forming part of Ireland's culture and ancient tradition.
If hurling catches hold of you, you get in bother, because it stops becoming a sport and becomes a cult.
Hurling evokes and stirs in Irish people this sort of very deep sense of nationality. It has been identified as the game of the Irish going back hundreds of years, and not only by Irish people but by people visiting the country.
It is even believed that the sport of hurling predates Irish civilization itself.
It's a mythic game. Soccer was invented then and rugby was invented there and so on. So hurling wasn't invented. Hurling goes back to the gods. It predates the Greeks, predates all of that. It's mythic.
In the northwest, hurling has been discovered to be a hugely popular native sport, a sport which requires courage and passion.
The game of common to hurling as we know it today has changed immeasurably. If you go back to that pre-GAA period, there were no regular teams, let alone identified clubs. There were no codified rules. What happened was that the game then was played with improvised sticks cut from trees, branches or whatever, and was played largely with a wooden ball or bull. And then when you go into the GAA era, the sticks that were played with, the commons, were much narrower in the boss and different shape, and they have metamorphosed over the last century to become a wider boss and more consistent maybe in shape.
During his research, Dr. Donal McAnallen discovered the sport's strong legacy within Derry.
It survived right through the 19th century in the northwest and was being played even after the Great Famine, which was believed to have killed the game around much of the island. It always just kept hanging on by a thread, this old tradition. The oldest existing county championship trophy in the GAA is the Derry Hurling Championship Cup of 1891, and is still in existence. And that in itself sort of seemed to reflect this great prize for a competition, and nobody knew anything about it. It was the very fact that hurling was the most prominent Gaelic game in Derry over the first quarter century of the GAA sort of confounds a lot of people's received wisdom, and the game never really died.
In the early 20th century, strict rules, opposition and events at the time saw hurlers going at great lengths to play the sport they love.
Constantly the game ran into conflict with the authorities. You couldn't play it in Brook Park, you weren't allowed to play on a Sunday on corporation-owned fields, and young fellows went out and they played, even if they didn't have a proper field to play on. They found a patch of green grass and they practiced there, they practiced in the street, or they went out as far as they had to go to get a field.
Over the years, the sport was never completely forgotten, with a few key figures actively working to keep hurling alive.
Our family connection is well over 100 years old in terms of hurling. To my knowledge, it could be before that, but my grandfather actually played at county level against Kilkenny back in 1906 or something like that. So there's a tradition there.
In the 1970s, when it was said you couldn't get a hurler in Derry City, where the likes of the Mellons kept the game going and passed on the baton to Na Magha, who then picked it up in the early 1980s and kept it going.
Forming Na Magha Hurling Club in 1981, the sport was reintroduced to the public.
Basically, we had a senior team. That was it. We didn't train an awful lot, but we did get involved in county games. It was only when we made the connection with the school and the brother was in that we started to produce what we call juvenile teams. That was at under 12. Now that was the youngest we had, under 12s, whereas now we have under 6s, we have under 8s, we have under 10s. So we've actually 3 tiers before we get the under 12. So that gives you an idea of the growth, and that's a massive difference. So, and over time then we developed into under 14, under 16 minor. So we have the full spectrum now, and that's a massive difference I've actually seen. I feel they actually get a sense of power. You see, when they start getting that strike, can you imagine if you're feeling a bit frustrated, but you've something to take it out on, and the power that they feel? I think that's part and parcel of it. But they appreciate as time goes on, as their skill levels develop, especially when they're quite young. I think they're actually fully aware of that. You know, the ability to one touch of a sitter, it's in my hand. And whether it's that side or it's that side, I can send that thing 60 miles an hour. You know, not only that, but it's coming back in there 60 miles an hour, and I put my hand up and catch it. And I think they do actually appreciate that's really, really important, you know.
Passionate about the sport they teach and the culture it is born from, Na Magha took an initiative to honour the game by embarking on a cultural legacy project, reflecting the spirit of the hurling way of life in Derry, and extending the development of its children to teach them another strong age-old Irish culture, traditional music.
We gave a brief to a historian to go away and look into the history of hurling in this city. And he went away, did a lot of research and produced a wonderful essay. We handed it to some traditional Irish musicians, John McSherry and Donald O'Connor, and they are composing a suite of music.
Every week for 13 weeks, the children will come to An Culturelán in Derry to be taught the tin whistle and boran by traditional music experts Donald O'Connor and John McSherry.
This project is novel because these kids have been presented with an opportunity that maybe wouldn't have come about in normal circumstances. So like GA clubs tend not to overlap with traditional music organisations. So it's a unique project in that case. You tend to get maybe kids coming whose parents are interested in traditional music and have been through the whole sort of cultus or the teaching side of things, and so they want their kids to experience the same thing. And perhaps we're seeing a group of kids whose parents didn't have that experience or didn't have that possibility. So it's a totally new thing, a totally unique thing.
When you practice like as much beats as we have, it gets like easy to do like the higher beats because you can just split the beats up.
I mean, the teaching is just kind of one aspect of this whole project. We're composing as well, and for the performance in the Guildhall on the 9th of May. So we've been working away at that, and we're now transcribing our compositions. And in the middle of all that, we're trying to find a piece within our composition that we can teach to the kids that they can then join us.
For the club members and families involved in Na Magha, it's not just a sport. It's a bonding and an extension of family.
It really does try to be very family orientated, and that's always a major focus for us.
You do find that there's quite a good camaraderie and closeness between the families, and it's a lot of it's built around 3, 4, 5 families.
There's something that started centuries ago, and I'm part of keeping that going centuries later. I mean, you couldn't ask for better than that, you know.
They clash in Patrick's season to gain for them the cup, who run and leap and catch and swing by the swirling waves of foil. Na Magha, Na Magha, Na Magha, a bird, Burke and Block now. First time pull now,
mighty.
Yeah, hearts mighty.
No, they're mighty. Yeah.